Margaret had been waiting tables at Carson's Steakhouse for 32 years. At 58, her hands knew every plate, every table, every demanding customer who walked through those doors. The work was honest, the tips decent, and it paid for the little house she shared with her husband Tom. Tom was different from most men their age. 20 years in, the Navy SEALs had carved him into something solid and unshakable. Now retired at 60, he spent his days woodworking in their garage. But that quiet intensity never left his eyes. That Thursday evening started like any other. Margaret tied her apron, checked her reflection in the staff bathroom mirror, and headed to the dining floor. Her section was filling up quickly. The new manager, Richard Calloway, had arrived 3 months ago. 45 years old, expensive suit, slicked back hair, and an attitude that made everyone uncomfortable. He ran the restaurant like he was commanding an army, except he'd never served a day in his life. He just liked the power. Margaret was carrying a tray of drinks when she felt a splash of ice water down her back. Table 7. A young executive had knocked his glass while gesturing too wildly about some business deal. "I am so sorry," Margaret said calmly. "Grabbing napkins? Should watch where you're going," the man snapped. Though everyone nearby had seen what happened, before Margaret could respond, Richard appeared. His face was red, his voice sharp and cutting. "Margaret, bathroom now." The dining room went quiet. Margaret felt 60 pairs of eyes on her back as she walked toward the restrooms, Richard following close behind. She'd worked in restaurants long enough to know. This wasn't about the spilled water. What Margaret didn't know was that Tom had arrived early to pick her up. He liked to sit at the small bar near the entrance, nursing a coffee and reading his newspaper. He'd seen the whole thing. And now he was watching Richard follow his wife toward the back hallway in the narrow corridor outside the bathrooms. Richard grabbed Margaret's collar. Not hard enough to hurt, but enough to make his point. He pushed her back against the white tile wall. "You're making me look bad out there," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "One more mistake and you're done. You understand me? I don't care how long you've worked here." Margaret's heart pounded. She'd faced difficult managers before, but never this. Never physical intimidation. She was about to speak when she saw movement behind. Richard. Tom had moved down the hallway with the silent precision that 20 years of special operations had taught him. He wasn't a large man, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made Richard freeze. "I think you should step back from my wife," Tom said quietly. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. Richard released Margaret's collar and turned, trying to puff himself up. "This is a private employment matter. You need to leave." Tom didn't raise his voice. "I watched what happened out there. That man spilled his own drink. You know it. Everyone knows it. And now you've put your hands on someone who's worked here longer than you've probably held any job." "I'm the manager here," Richard sputtered. "I'll call the police." "Please do," Tom said, still calm. "I'm sure they'd be very interested in reviewing the security footage of you, physically intimidating an employee in a back hallway. Meanwhile, everyone in that dining room is wondering why you humiliated a woman who's probably served half of them for years." The color drained from Richard's face. He hadn't considered the cameras. He hadn't considered anything except his own anger and embarrassment. Margaret straightened her uniform. Her voice was steady now, strengthened by Tom's presence. "Richard, I've worked here since before you were out of college. I've served governors and celebrities and ordinary folks just trying to have a nice meal. I've never once deserved to be treated the way you just treated me." Tom stepped forward slightly. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to Margaret. Then you're going to walk back into that dining room and tell everyone that what happened was not her fault. And if I ever hear that you've spoken to her or anyone else on your staff this way again, that security footage finds its way to the owner. Are we clear?" Richard looked between them. His authority, his swagger, all of it had evaporated. He mumbled an apology that Margaret accepted with more grace than he deserved. When they walked back to the dining room, Richard made the announcement. It was brief and uncomfortable, but it was enough. The staff exchanged glances. They'd all been afraid of him. But now, they'd seen him backed down by a quiet man in a flannel shirt. 2 weeks later, Richard Calloway resigned. The staff never learned if he left on his own or if the owner had seen that footage, but it didn't matter. Margaret finished her shift that night with more tips than she'd ever received. People remembered kindness. They remembered dignity. In the car ride home, Tom reached over and squeezed Margaret's hand. Neither of them said much. They didn't need to. After 35 years of marriage, some things were understood. Respect wasn't about size or volume or authority. It was about recognizing the dignity in every person, especially those who work hardest and complain least. Margaret kept waiting tables for 5 more years before retiring. She never faced another manager like Richard. And every Thursday, Tom still showed up early. Sitting at that bar with his coffee and newspaper, keeping watch over the woman who'd given him a lifetime of love and loyalty. Sometimes strength isn't about confrontation. Sometimes it's just about standing beside someone and reminding the world they're not alone. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories about everyday courage and human decency. Leave a comment below telling us about a time someone stood up for you, or when you stood up for someone else. These moments matter more than we know.